بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمنت بالله صدق الله العظيم. Ameen. I've started with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. This is our opening session. So I've started with the opening surah of the Quran al-Majid. And I'm just going to begin also with a couple of verses in praise of our noble and beloved Master Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the form of the Qasida Burda of Imam Busiri, as this is a course that's built around the works of Sufi poets. One of them is also Imam Busiri alayhi rahmah. And so I think it'd be apt for us to begin with a couple of verses, and then inshallah we'll begin our discussion for today. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم محمد سيد الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم هو الحبيب الذي ترجى شفاعته لكل هول من الأهوال مقتحم لكل هول من الأهوال مقتحم يا رب بالمصطفى بلغ مقاصدنا واغفر لنا ما مضى يا واسع الكرم واغفر لنا ما مضى يا واسع الكرم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد أفلح من زكاها صدق الله العظيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وأصحاب سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم صلاة وسلام عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله وعلى آلك وأصحابك يا سيدي يا حبيب الله. Right, with the welcomes out of the way, inshallah, this series will be focusing around contributions of Persian Sufi poets. And in particular, the title, which I'm sure captured all of your imaginations, was An Encounter with Rumi. Some people may have mistaken that as being, this is going to be a 6-week course about Maulana Rum or his Masnavi. I had those questions. Well, the Masnavi is a voluminous work. We could have courses that span over many years, and we wouldn't get through the entire Masnavi in any justice. Thousands of verses. So yes, we will be inshallah touching upon the Masnavi, and if need be, then I also have in mind of arranging a separate course that will look at an abridgment of the Masnavi of Maulana Rum alayhi rahmah, inshallah, as well. So we will be touching upon that. I struggled for a long time. I took a lot of advice from some of my sort of students and advisors, etc., on what the format should be. Originally, I was thinking 6 weeks or six poets, their biographies, and a look at their work. But from past experience, I know that that we're going to run short on time. It's never going to work. And so I originally brought it down to 3 poets, so one week on their biography and 1 week on some of their poetry and some of their work. But I've decided to go with 4, and I'll explain the format of the course inshallah now. So today's session we will be beginning with a brief look at the biography of a great Sufi poet who's authored not just in Persian, but he's not, in fact, it would be an injustice to say that he's authored in the Urdu or Hindi language, because he's not just authored in the Urdu and Hindi language, he is considered as the father of the Urdu and Hindi language. And that's Khwaja Amir Khusro, rahimahullah ta'ala. Khusro is a very, very prominent name. If you're familiar with Sufi poetry or Persian poetry, you'll be familiar with that name, Amir Khusro. In particular, his one kalam, which I'll be reciting for you today as well, and I'll be talking about that briefly towards the end. Namidanam je manzil bud, shabjaye ke man budam. That might sound familiar to you. That's something that has sent many a Sufi and Salik into spiritual trance and spiritual ecstasy, and I'll explain the reason to you why as well. There's a very particular reason in my mind for that. And so we start today with Khwaja Amir Khusro, and next, I was going to say tomorrow, next week, inshallah, we'll be looking at arguably, in all the poetry that I've come across, and I say arguably because it's difficult to choose sometimes, there's other people there at that level as well, but arguably the greatest sort of passion and pain of desire of meeting the beloved Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you see in anyone's poetry, it has got to be Maulana Abdurrahman Jami, and his poetry is just absolutely phenomenally, and it's immensely emotional, and there's so much pain and passion in that poetry. There's no other ways of describing it. And so inshallah, in the next session we'll look at a short biography of Maulana Abdurrahman Jami, who he was, because remember, a lot of these Sufi poets, if you came into these sessions, and I'm sure none of you did, but it has to be said, if you came into these sessions thinking that tasawwuf is growing your hair long and wearing a long jubba and a load of tasbeehs around your neck, then unfortunately you're in the wrong place, because almost all of these Sufiya that we're going to be talking about in this series and coming series, they are also at the same time some of the greatest ulama and scholars of their time. And so these were not just people who were constantly and always in a false state of spiritual ecstasy or a trance. These were people who were pillars and guides of the deen and of Islam in their times, as is Maulana Abdurrahman Jami. And so we'll look at who he was, and it's the fact that these people were so prominent in the field of knowledge, and they were the greatest ulama of their time, that makes the love that they've shown towards the Prophet ﷺ, it gives it that much more sort of emphasis and impact. And so that's the next one. And then inshallah we'll be looking at two individuals who are very closely related, Shaykh Fariduddin Attar and Maulana Rumi, or Maulana Rum, as he's also known, Mevlana. We're going to be looking at those two in the last 4 weeks. So I've dedicated a longer portion of time for each, because we'll talk about their biographies and their works in more detail. And there's a connection between the two. Although there's so many poets that I could have brought in, right, who have been... Rumi has been one of the greatest inspirations for poets of all languages, to the extent that Iqbal, Dr. Iqbal of Pakistan, the great philosopher and great poet of Pakistan, he says that Maulana Rumi is my peer. He's my spiritual guide. Right? So, living centuries apart. And, in Pakistan, and a lot of his work actually is in Persian. I considered including Dr. Iqbal in here. But inshallah, Dr. Iqbal, we will look at separately in another series. What I have planned in my mind is, inshallah, with your feedback, if this is something that you've taken from and that you enjoy, I do plan to do this as a number of different series. So Urdu Sufi poets, Punjabi Sufi poets, Arabic Sufi poets as well. There's at least 4 series in there. And we can look at different people from different parts of the world and how they showed their love for the Prophet ﷺ through their poetry. And Dr. Iqbal, inshallah, if we come to it, will come into the Urdu series, and in particular we'll look at his shikwa and Jawab-e Shikwa, the complaint that he wrote, which ruffled many feathers at the time, to the extent that there were calls for fatwas of kufr against him and so on, and which forced him to write the Jawab-e Shikwa, the answer to his complaint as well. And the reason why was because this complaint, it seemed, he had addressed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so a very interesting concept. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So let's make a start at least on this particular series. So today we're looking at Khaja Amir Khusro, rahimahullah ta'ala. His father was Saifuddin. His name was Saifuddin. And Amir is actually a title, and it was a title that in that time amongst the sort of in the subcontinent was given by the kings to prominent people. It was like a lord of the realm and so on. That kind of a title, someone who had an army under them as well. And his actual name was Mahmud. So he was also known as Amir. As Amir Khusro is known, he's also known as Amir Saifuddin. Mahmud being his name, Shamsi, from Balakh, right? So he was also referred to as Balakhi, and known as Turk because his origins were Turkish. And so again, even there you see a distant connection with Maulana Rum, and through the Turkish heritage and lineage as well. Khaja Amir Khusro, he was born in 1253 and he passed away in 1325 at the age of 72. You may find some slightly differing narrations, but you will find that his age is mentioned around between 70 and 75. So 72 according to this narration. He was born in a place in India by the name of Patiali, and this is in the Indian province of Uttar Pradesh, or also known as UP. He was born there. This place where he was born, the exact location, some say that later it has now, or in later times, it has become known by his name as Khusro Nagar. Nagar means locality, and so it became known as Khusro's locality, Khusro Nagar. So that's the kind of impact that he's had locally. But inshallah we'll look at the kind of impact that he's had beyond that as well, because his impact goes beyond localities and also beyond borders of time as well. And that's the reason why, after 800 years, 900 years, we're sitting here talking about Amir Khusro. So he's somebody who's had a major impact. So originally of Turkish descent, when the Mongols attacked certain sort of areas around Balakh and so on, his father emigrated from there on advice of certain people. He emigrated from there and he moved from there to avoid that attack, and he came to modern day India or Hindustan. And he took up work in the military. So he started he was employed by the king in the army, and very quickly became very respected and earned the title of Amir. So he gained a lot of respect and fame very, very quickly and earned this title Amir, and then he was given a whole battalion under his command. And so Amir you can think of as commander, in those days, commander in arms, and so he earned that title for himself very quickly. Imadul Mulk, who was the wazir to the king, who was in effect, he was the defense minister. Right? He was the wazir to the king, effectively the defense, equivalent to what you would say as defense minister to the king of that time. And he saw obviously something within Saifuddin, Khaja Amir Khusro's father, and so he gave him his daughter by the name of Daulat Naz. He gave her into his nikah, and so he gave her hand for marriage to Amir Khusro's father. And from that marriage, he then had 3 sons, one of them being Khaja Amir Khusro, and 1 daughter. The whole family was actually very religious and very academic, and they were all people, his brothers as well, Amir Khusro's brothers and his father. You'll hear shortly what their connection was to other Sufiya at the time. At the age of 6, his father then moved again from where he'd come into India. He moved to Delhi, and in those days, when Amir Khusro was of 6 years old, Shah Nizamuddin Awliya, a very, very famous name. These are all Amir Khusro himself and Shaykh Khaja Mahbub-e Ilahi Nizamuddin Awliya. They're all Sufis of the Chishti Sufi order. So this is something very close to my heart personally, because as you'll know, I'm Sial Sharif, where I've given my Astana or sort of Dargah, where I'm associated with. I have the honor of being associated with, not worthy of, but I have the honor of being associated with, is part of the Chishti Sufi order. It falls above, in terms of when you look at the Shajra or the spiritual lineage, Sial Sharif falls above Gola Sharif, as some of you may know the name, Pir Meher Ali Shah, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. He took his fairs and his bai'ah from Sial Sharif. So it falls just above there. So this is something that I have a personal affinity with anyway. So these are shuyukh from the Chishti Sufi order. And so Khaja Nizamuddin Awliya, also known as Mahbub-e Ilahi. Mahbub-e Ilahi means beloved of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that was one of his titles, that's what he was known as. Right? So Khaja Mahbub-e Ilahi or Nizamuddin, his name Khaja Nizamuddin Awliya of Delhi. That was the time when he himself moved into Delhi. So Khaja Nizamuddin Awliya moved into Delhi, came to Delhi around that time, and he was living there. And not only was he living there, he was living in the home of Khaja Amir Khusro's maternal grandfather, his Nana. Right? So they'd relocated to Delhi, where they were staying, where his father was staying with his in-laws, and so effectively Khaja Amir Khusro was living in the same home as Khaja Nizamuddin Awliya. Right? So that's where the close connection begins from, right at this tender age of 6. And then by age 7, his father was martyred, he was killed in battle. And so he then grew up under the care of his maternal grandfather, his Nana, who was the defense minister to the king. And so he was very much beloved of his father and his grandfather. His father, looking at this Shaykh living in the home of his father-in-law, was so impressed by Khaja Nizamuddin Awliya that he himself took bay'ah, and he made all 3 of his sons take bay'ah with him as well. So it was at that tender age of 6, according to this account. There are other accounts of him going later to visit the Shaykh, and then being inspired to write some poetry as well, thinking that if my Shaykh really can change my heart, he should be aware of what is in my heart, so I want him to respond to my poetry. And he asked, I'm only going to come in if you're going to actually, if you're going to bless my heart. And then he was responded to, and he went in. But that's something that can be accounted for in that, that could be an incident that took place after his bay'ah as a child to content his heart. So he took bay'ah at that early age because of his father's encouragement, and so they all became murids and disciples of Khaja Nizamuddin Awliya, who was quite young. He was in the prime of his youth himself at the time, and he'd come to the purpose of him coming to Delhi he was in his late teens at the time when he came into Delhi, and he came to complete his religious studies and his studies in the course of Qadi, of Qada, of being a judge. So his father passed away at the age of 7. He was then taken under the care of his maternal grandfather, and he ensured that he was taken care of not just physically but also spiritually and academically in every way possible. Wherever he found any great teacher, he would take him there, and he would ensure that he learned from him. Whatever spiritual lesson he could teach him, he taught him. And so he was nurtured well in every aspect by his maternal grandfather. At the age of 8, he wrote his first poem in the Persian language. At the age of 8. My daughter is now 9. Right? So I've got something as a benchmark to actually judge against. So he was gifted. He was truly gifted. He wrote his first poem in Persian at the age of 8, and when he recited it in front of his teachers, it left them in shock. Right? That this kind of eloquent poetry, and the class of poetry coming out of the mouth or from the pen of an 8-year-old was truly remarkable and miraculous for them. And so he remained under the care of his maternal grandfather for 10 years. Right? From around the age of 7 to about age of 17, 18. Right? 10, 11 years he remained under the care of his maternal grandfather, who then passed away when Khaja Amir Khusro was 18 years of age, and his grandfather at the time was 113 years old. So he was someone who lived a long life, and who had a lot of experience and education to teach him. At 18 years of age, he himself then enlisted in the army, and he joined the king's troops and ranks. And very, very quickly, just like his father, he gained a lot of respect and notoriety within the army. It was at that age of 18 that his first compilation actually came into publication. So he's one of those people who actually achieved fame and notoriety in his life at a very early age. Some poets, they actually come to light afterwards. For example, Shaykh Fariduddin Attar, some of his works only really caught the limelight after he passed away, and so on. So we're going to talk about him separately. But this is somebody who achieved a massive fame and notoriety during his life and very early in his life. Now, 18 years of age at that time was an age of real maturity. Times change, and so somebody who's 18 years of age living, even in other, there's different lifestyles. You go to some places where children are brought up in a harsh and rugged kind of lifestyle and mature very quickly. You will find that an 18-year-old from such a place and someone who's 18 brought up here and being mothered all the time and under every kind of protection and having everything that they need, they don't mature as easily. But this is going now many hundreds of years ago. 18 years of age, and for somebody who had become an outstanding poet by the age of 8. So in those 10 years, you can imagine how he matured. So he enlisted in the army. In 1 year, he achieved great fame. And so the king, he called him and he requested for him to recite something. And so he recited a poem in front of the king, and the king showered upon him lavish gifts and very expensive gifts and held him very close to himself. In his lifetime, he saw the coming and going of 6 different kings. Now, there's a lot of info, and mainly political info, about Amir Khusro, which we could go into, but we don't have the time to go into that. Around these different kings and how they came onto the throne and how they were, whether they died or they were killed or they were removed, all of that information is available, but it's not really directly related to Khaja Amir Khusro. It's more about the political climate that he was in at the time. What is interesting though is that often you find that different kings coming, having different loyalties and so on, positions change. But Khaja Amir Khusro remained a close advisor to all 6 of these kings, and even the 7th one that took to the throne during his life. Right? So 7 different kings. And so around 1283, when the Mongols attacked again India, he had moved, by that time, with changing of kings, he'd actually moved from Delhi to Multan, which is now in modern day Pakistan. So he'd moved from modern day India into modern day Pakistan. Obviously that border not being there then. He moved to Multan, and in 1283, when the Mongols attacked Multan, the king, who was not just a king and his employer, but a very good friend of his, was killed by them. And there's 2 different accounts. One is that Khaja Amir Khusro was taken prisoner, and he was taken to Balkh and he was imprisoned there for 2 years. The other one is that he was taken captive. His captor, one of the Mongol soldiers, tied a noose around his neck and dragged him, tied him on one end of the rope, tied that to the back of or to something on the horse, the saddle of the horse, and on the other was around his neck. And he was dragged in this way. And some count this as one of his spiritual miracles, his karamat. But being dragged in this way, the soldier and the horse, they traveled so fast and such a distance that they became so thirsty that they couldn't withstand that thirst. They came to a water source where it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's doing that both the soldier and the horse were killed or they drowned. And because Amir Khusro was trailing behind on the rope, he was saved. And so he says that with great difficulty, I untied the rope and I somehow managed to make my way back to Delhi. So went through some difficulties in his life as well. This period of Multan is really very colorful in the life of Amir Khusro and his works, because it was a period, it seems, that he enjoyed in his life a great deal, but also of great sorrow as well. The death of his friend, the king, and then being captured, and then having to free himself and coming back to Delhi. It was a difficult time for him as well. He came back to Delhi, took up residence with his mother, and he locked himself up in a room. He wouldn't leave his room. And he took up residence with his mother. He wouldn't move from the room. And eventually, and he was writing, constantly writing. So Amir Khusro has many, many works, thousands of couplets long. So this is one thing to remember. With any of these poets, if you're thinking that would be able to do justice to any significant work of theirs within 6 weeks, then unfortunately that's not true. But this is to give you an idea of what true tasawwuf actually is. Coming back to the beginning of where I started off, the long hair, and if you had this sensation of people dancing around on the music of qawwali and so on, no, this is not tasawwuf. Right? You'll find out who these Sufiya were and what they went through in their lives to achieve what they did. And we'll have a glimpse, we'll look at a glimpse of some of their works as well, inshallah. And for Amir Khusro and Maulana Jami, rahmatullahi alayhi, I've selected short poems. One of Amir Khusro, one of Maulana Jami, you'll find out next week. I've selected 2 short poems because there's no point even looking at one of their major works, because just to do an introduction of that work, it would take us very, very long. So inshallah, like I said, there's a potential here for many different series, like a series on the Masnavi standalone. Mantiqut Tayr, Conference of the Birds of Shaykh Fariduddin Attar is a very significant work. So again, that on its own is a standalone course. But I'm running very, very short on time, so I'm not going to digress too much. Coming back to the point that is not tasawwuf. What is tasawwuf? Allah says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ ذَكَّاهَا. The one who purified it has succeeded. The one who purified it has succeeded. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. What does that mean? Purified what? The heart. The heart is it's a mirror or a looking glass. Those who have allowed it to get dirty, they don't see the reality, the haqiqah of things as those who have maintained it, or those who have managed to cleanse it and polish it. The realities that they see when they peer into their own hearts, they are unimaginable. And that's true tasawwuf. And how does that cleansing of the heart come? It comes through knowledge, through learning the deen, through learning the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and through reenacting the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, is that polishing of the hearts. And then also the path of suluk, service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, trying to maintain constant dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and polishing this looking glass to such a way that when you look down and peer into your heart, right? When a true Sufi, and he doesn't even need to look, because he will close his eyes. He will close his eyes and he will lower his head, and he will be looking in through this looking glass, and what he will be seeing, you can never even imagine. I'll give you a glimpse of what he will be seeing when we look at the poem that Amir Khusro that I've chosen, because that is one of those moments. When I said to you that that poem, I believe, I've seen people listening to it. I've seen more people react spiritually to that particular poem than I have to anything else. Why? That's the connection that I believe, because that was his. What is it? Why is it so important? In that poem, he has actually told us when he's closed his eyes and when he's lowered his head. You won't find the Sufiya often talking about what they see. They'll give you those teachings and the lessons. He's actually described for us vividly when he's closed his eyes and he's looked down and he's looked into that seeing glass. He has described to us vividly what he saw there. And that's why it's so amazing. So anyway, in his home, writing away, authored, all sorts. And in his lifetime, he had lots of his work published. Right? He was then summoned by the king again, Amir Khusro, the next king. He befriended him as well. He's the one who actually gave him the title of Amir and of Khusro. He gave him that title of Amir Khusro. And he blessed him, and or he bestowed upon him many lavish gifts and so on. He authored many books of thousands of couplets, and again this king Alauddin Khilji, he once said to him, he said, I want to go. because he'd heard about Khaja Mahbub Ilahi Nizamuddin Awliya, the Shaykh of Amir Khusro. He'd heard about him, and he'd heard how thousands come and thousands go, and they are all fed. This is one of the basic tenets of tasawwuf. Afshu salam wa at'imu ta'am. Spread peace, spread salam, and feed people. This is why you will find, any dargah that you go to, one thing in common that you will find, langar. And in the modern day, there are people who have issues with this, and who criticize. And well, my friends, you need to look at our history. We are followers of the Sufiya. Look at our history. And this Afshu Salam wa At'imu Ta'am, this is a teaching of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's the first khutbah that was given by the Prophet ﷺ when he arrived in Medina Munawwara. And no one, especially in this country, it's not a matter, and I'll clarify this for those people who have these issues as well. It's not a matter of somebody, don't you eat in your own homes? When you have these programs, if we don't provide food, are you going to go without? Possibly some may, but realistically speaking, how many are going to go without? It's not about the food. It's about that interaction with the community. It's about being in these blessed places as a group. It's about coming to those gatherings. And for argument's sake, who are you to judge somebody's intention? I often hear this phrase, they come for the food. Really? How do you know? You've been gifted with the ability of peering into somebody's heart. And even for argument's sake, somebody who's come specifically for the food. How do you know that that person is not going to come and during that gathering there's going to be it only takes one moment. When we come on to Shaykh Fariduddin Attar, you will find out how at the age of 40 he went from being a phenomenally successful merchant to selling everything and giving everything away for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in one moment. One moment. And also somebody who's known as the king of awliya, Sultan al-Awliya, Sultan Ibrahim bin Adham. Read his story. He was literally a king of his own kingdom and realm. Gave that up in an instant. The heart changes in an instant. How do you know that maybe he came with the intention of the food, but it's that tarbiyah, that sohbah, that sitting there, something is said something will click, and that will be the moment that the heart changes. So who are you to go around criticizing this particular sort of exercise? But anyway, coming back to the point, the king, he said, I'm going to have to finish on this, and we're not going to be able to read the poem today. We'll be looking at that. I'll recite one or two verses for you as the conclusion. The explanation, and there's a special background to that poem. And really, believe me when I tell you, you are looking into, you will have the experience. When I explain to you, you will have the experience of looking at what Amir Khusro saw when he closed. And it wasn't just his eyes that were closed. He was sitting in front of one of the greatest awliya of his time. Shaykh Abu Ali Qalandar. He was sitting in his presence, and he had his hand placed on his chest, on his heart. He placed his hand on his chest, and he said to him, Khusro, close your eyes and peer into your heart. What did he see? That I will explain to you next week. But I'm just going to finish off this particular incident about the king here. He went to Amir Khusro, and the king said, I'm going to find out what is the source of his wealth. Where's all this money coming from? That's something that people have issues as well with. But the fact is, I can tell you stories personally that I can vouch for and know of, and many ulama will vouch for you, of people, who have spent vast amounts. They've spent so much in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that governments have tried to come in and interject, and they've tried to take over, and they have failed as governments. Right? And one of those is the Grand Shaykh of Gulhar Sharif in Kotli in Azad Kashmir. The masajid that were built, a true wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our times. And no one knew that the government tried to intercept as well. And they couldn't, they didn't know where and it was coming and how it was being funded. This is the same thing that the king tried to do at the time. He said, I'm going to go and I'm going to go undercover and I'm going to go and see where his wealth is coming from, what's the source of his wealth. And so Amir Khusro went to his Shaykh and he told him, he said, the king is intending to come to you undercover to see this. And so he asked, he said, Khusro, what's your suggestion? And Amir Khusro said, meet him. And he said, no. He said, there's two entrances to this place. When royalty comes in from one entrance, Nizamuddin Awliya leaves from the other entrance. I don't want anything. And you know what that reminded me of when I was researching, when I was writing this down, it reminded me of the incident of Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahimahullah ta'ala. When the Khalifa at the time sent him the gold coins in a bag, in a sack. What did he say? He initially refused. And then when he insisted and insisted, he took a hold of them and started squeezing them. And blood started pouring out of that gold. And he said, if I didn't have the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I would squeeze and squeeze and squeeze until the whole of Baghdad would be flooded with blood. He said, this is the blood of those people that you have pillaged in order to collect this wealth. I don't want it and I don't need it. Take it. Such are the men of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, but then, Khaja Nizamuddin Awliya, he said to Khusro, he said, what's going to become of you now? Now what happens if the king, I'm going to leave, I'm not going to meet him. But if the king finds out that you've disclosed his secret to me, what's going to become of you? You know his response was? He said, if I didn't tell you as my Shaykh, as my spiritual leader, as my guide, if I didn't come and tell you what his plans were, that would have been the death of my iman. At the most, what is he going to do if he finds out? It will be the death of my body. Right? If I had betrayed you, it would have been the death of my soul. And if he finds out now, what's the most he can do? It will be the death of my body. And so, those couple of verses, Namidanam che manzil bood shab jaye ke manbudam. Namidanam che manzil bood shab jaye ke manbudam. Bahar su rakse bismil bood shab jaye ke manbudam. Khuda khud mere majlis bood andar lam ka khusro. Mohammed sham mahfil bood shab jaye ke manbudam. Mohammed sham mahfil bood shab jaye ke manbudam. He says, Nami danam che manzil bood shab jaye ke manbudam. I don't know, what an amazing place. I can't explain to you the place where I had the fortune of spending the night. Bahar su rakse bismil bood shab jaye ke manbudam. In the place where I spent the night, there were people who were in such a state of spiritual pain and yearning that you would find a bird in when it's been slaughtered and it's flapping its wings around. Right? That's the state that they were in. And then eventually he finishes off, the last couplet of this poem is Khuda khud mere majlis bood andar la makan khusro. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presides over the gathering in la makan, which is basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not associated with any place or time, which is, we can't describe it, and so the word that's used is la makan, no place. But we can't describe it beyond that. Allah presides over that gathering, but Muhammad shamme mahfil bood, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the light of that gathering. He's the guest of honor of that gathering where I spent the night. Where was that place? What was he doing? What did he see? Absolutely amazing. And it will leave you in awe when you listen to the story next time, inshallah, next Friday. Any questions for Eid? Jazakallah, thank you for coming. We've concluded with dua. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammadin wa ala ali Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammadin wa barik wa sallim. Allahumma rabbana taqabbal minna innaka anta as-sami'ul alim wa tub alayna innaka anta at-tawwabur rahim. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala khayri khalqihi Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahim.